so the topic today is the bad results of good intentions. And so I've got this image up here, and probably, I know at least two of you were around when this was going on. What year were you born?
I was 2 years old when this went down.
Okay, okay. So you were around.
I was born in 82.
All right, very good. I was between I think I was 18 years old the summer that this happened, and I was thrilled because, you know, Live Aid, not only was it all these great rock and roll bands that were being brought back, but it was for a good cause. And who was the guy who put this thing on? I'll be really excited if anybody knows that.
I can't remember.
His name was Bob Geldof.
What was it?
Bob Geldof is the guy's name. And I'd be even more ecstatic if anybody knew the band that he was in before he did all this stuff. It's called the Boomtown Rats. Nobody knows the Boomtown Rats except me. Well, Bob Geldof and all these musicians back in the 80s put on this big Live Aid effort. You know, we even got a stunning Christmas song out of it. It's one of my most hated Christmas songs. We got that out of it, and really the purpose of it, and you can even see it from the image, was to help the poor starving people in Africa. I mean, that's all you have to do is invoke poor starving people in Africa, and you can get lots of people to send lots of money. And I don't know how many millions of dollars they got out of this, but they raised a considerable amount. Question, is there still poverty, bad conditions in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that wasn't enough. He had yet another one, and it was called Live 8, where not only were they raising money, but they were attempting to get nations, the big nations like us around the world, to forgive African debt. And so this was probably 10 years ago, and the question is, did that solve the problem for Africa? No, it did not. And Bob Geldof was confronted with this, how it really hasn't resulted in relieving people in African countries, and here was his response: well, something must be done, even if it doesn't work. Now think about that for a second. What's behind a statement like that? Something must be done, even if it doesn't work. What does that mean?
Give it a try. I guess.
Why? If it doesn't work,
That we ought.
Something
He's
must
suggesting-
be tried,
Mhm.
even if it doesn't work.
Yeah. He's suggesting that we ought, that we should have this ought, but he doesn't necessarily know how to make the ought come into the real world.
yeah, you would think some consideration would be given as to what would work, and then let's do that. And I understand he has a sense of urgency. We need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on a campground many years ago, and people would come to the maintenance guy and say, well, what do you want us to do? He would say, well, just do something. Oh, really? You want us just to do something, even if it's not productive? It's like there's this emotional component to it. We need to do something to make us feel better, even if it doesn't work. Let me give you another example here, and perhaps you have some of these, maybe not. Tom's shoes. What have Tom's shoes become renowned for? And I'm not making fun of the motive behind this. I think it's a great motive. What really put them on the map, so to speak?
Donation, not just of proceeds, but of shoes.
Right, so if you buy a pair, what does Tom's do?
They give a pair.
They donate a pair.
Yeah, they donate a pair, which is a great idea. And they've probably given away millions of pairs of shoes to third world countries, children and others in third world countries, which is great. Has it solved their problem? It has not. It has not solved the problem, and in fact, sometimes it actually makes things worse. Because, as we'll see, economically, it's really a disincentive, and it really ends up in the long run not being a good idea. It's great motives, but really not something that turns out to work. So that's what we're going to look at. These are things that these are good intentions that turn out to be bad ideas. Let's go back to economics and talk about that for just a second. What is economics? How did we define it last time? And you got to go with my definition because mine is simple. It's the science of, look at the guy,
He's confused.
Because he's got to make a
Choice.
choice, right? So that's what it is. It's the science of choice. Now, there's something that we haven't dealt with. Here's another economic term, so I'm giving you these really slowly. Yeah, in economics, there's something called opportunity cost. Anytime you choose something, there's always at least one other thing that you gave up. For example, when your alarm went off this morning, you had the choice between two things at least. What were they?
Getting up, staying in bed.
That's right. So if you got up, what was your opportunity cost?
Staying in bed.
That's right. It was staying in bed. Let's try another one. Any of you buy anything today that you can tell me about? What was the last thing you bought that you can remember?
Coffee.
Okay. Where did you buy it?
The blend.
Okay, you bought it at the blend.
Me too.
What was your opportunity cost? What did you give up?
I gave up time to take my daughter there, and I gave up
All right.
money to buy the coffee
You gave
that I
up
didn't even
time?
get to drink.
Good. You gave up time, you gave up money. What else did you give up? You gave up whatever else you could have done with that time, whatever else you could have done with that money, and you could think of whatever else you could have bought. And so opportunity cost is a big category. And here's the thing, the interesting thing about opportunity cost is sometimes it's hidden. Sometimes we don't realize that there is another choice that we could have had. And then sometimes that cost doesn't play out until later. And so a lot of what we're going to be looking at this morning, I won't call it opportunity cost, but that's what it is. We're going to look at efforts to help people, but then there was an opportunity cost. There's something that was given up, or there was something hidden that somebody did not take into account. And if they had simply thought through it, they might have been able to figure it out. Let me give you, this is a weird example, but this would fit too with economics. Back in, this would have been about 85, 86, the same as Live Aid. What laws came into the United States? Well, I should say North Carolina, but it actually hit the United States concerning automobiles. Do y'all remember back in the mid-80s? I know you were too young.
Catalytic converter.
Okay, that's one. That's not the one I'm thinking about. We all have to do it today.
Seatbelts.
Yeah, seatbelt laws.
Yeah.
Seatbelt laws came into existence. Why do they give us seatbelt laws?
The idea is to protect us.
Right, because what happens when there's a wreck, if you're ejected from the vehicle, that's a big danger to you. That's what causes a lot of deaths. Well, seatbelt laws went into existence, and guess what? The death rate did not decrease with seatbelt laws. Instead, what happened is that people started driving faster because they felt safer buckled in with those seatbelts. And so it's like it gave an incentive that people in law enforcement weren't expecting. And so it really there's not been a net gain in protection of life with seatbelt laws. So this kind of thing works in areas other than just economic choices. And I want to submit to you that part of the fun of economics is finding the opportunity cost. In fact, there's a great book, and I'll recommend this at the end. It's called Economics in One Lesson. It is a really great book, and here's what that author says. The art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any act or policy. That's opportunity cost. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy, not merely for one group, but for all groups. For example, with that last statement, when we do something for one group of people in the United States by passing a law, we think about that group and how it's going to benefit them, but then we don't think about everybody else. And that's where we often get into trouble. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So, and we could look at a bunch of different issues. We're only going to look at 4. And those 4 I am taking from this book, which I also recommend, called Money, Greed, and God by Jay Richards. He is part of the Discovery Institute. And it's really, really excellent. So let's look at the first one. And since some of you are drinking coffee, this might matter to you. Yeah, there's this thing called fair trade. You know what that is? Practically speaking, if it's fair trade coffee, what do you know is going to be true of it?
It's going to be more expensive.
Good, it's going to be more expensive. Why is it called fair trade? Like if you go to Starbucks You can either choose regular coffee or you can choose the fair trade coffee. You pay more for the fair trade. But why would you do that? Why would you ever pay more for coffee?
You're trying to support smaller companies, companies that are not marginalized by these bigger companies that are able to produce more.
Okay, that's close to what's going on with fair trade.
I think it's more of a support of the nations involved, the countries involved.
Mhm. It actually supports individual farmers, I've read. What happens
Yes.
is that companies like Starbucks will make deals. Now, this is way down the chain of production. Basically, what's happening in fair trade is the individual growers will make at least double on the coffee beans as market price. So market price, and I'm going to make this up, market price might be $1.50 per pound of bean, whereas free trade, they would get paid $3 per pound of coffee bean. So that's the way it works, and that's why it jacks the price up. Now, why would anybody do this? Well, it's because people look at the plight of those who grow coffee beans, in Central and South America, and the temperature has to be just right apparently for coffee. But what's going on is a lot of people who grow coffee still live in poverty because they're, in the eyes of the world, they're not getting paid enough for the coffee beans they're producing. So you got a person who's picking these coffee beans for like 10 cents a day. And we feel compassion, so we think, well, let's pay more for those coffee beans and that'll be the solution. Now, it sounds great. But what do you think the hidden cost of this is? I mean, how could it possibly hurt to pay people more for the coffee beans? Want to take any guess, any shots at this?
Money's gotta come from somewhere.
Well, why does that matter?
It involves, there's lots of things involved, but it involves a small number of people usually supporting things that maybe they don't need to support, maybe they don't want to support.
Okay. Now, there at least is a choice with free trade coffee, because you don't have to buy it. Well, here's what happens with free trade coffee. So here's the hidden cost. And so really knowing some of this requires knowing a little bit of economics as well. One of the things that happens is this: if you give farmers a high price, if you're paying them a higher than market price, what that's going to do is encourage other farmers to get in that market. Here's the thing: price in a market acts as a signal. And the higher that price is, the more people are going to want to jump into that market and sell it or produce it. Why is that?
Because you want to make money.
That's right. It's because we all want to make money. We all want to get the most bang for our buck. And so if entrepreneurs see rising prices in one market, it's going to cause them to jump into that market. But what's going on here is that you've got an artificially high price, raising the overall price of coffee beans that people are buying. And so what's going to happen is you're going to get too many farmers who are getting into this. And really, the fact that coffee bean prices are so low, what does that automatically tell you about that market?
There's already a big enough
Yeah.
volume is there already.
Right. There are already too many people there because, there must be something about it that's easy to do. Now, that doesn't sound too bad about more jumping into that market, except what you actually end up getting is a greater supply. And anytime you get a greater supply, that's going to affect
Drive the
things.
prices
That's
down.
right. It's going to have that effect on the price. But the second thing is this. And let's just take the United States for an example. We have a constant inflation rate. Constant. It's about 6% typically. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But what that means is that a year from now, the prices of goods and services are going to be 6% higher on average. Constantly. So that means that the price of coffee is going to go up and up and up. What's going to happen when fair trade coffee gets too high because of inflation? Well, what will happen is people will stop buying. People who normally, they would have felt compassion and said to themselves, okay, I'll pay an extra $1 for this. If it gets too high, they'll stop paying that extra $1. Then what happens?
Companies here in America stop offering it.
That's right. And so then you've got a bunch of farmers who jumped into this market because they thought they were going to make a lot of money, and then suddenly it evaporates. And so they're left out in the cold, basically.
The supply will exceed the demand, and
That's exactly right. And then what happens, in economics speak, they call it creative destruction, where the economy destroys businesses that are unnecessary. So that's the hidden cost of this. I mean, it's a great intention, but it doesn't result in a good outcome. So what do they really need? Here's what we need to focus on, and what nations often don't want to admit. If you've got so many people in your country who are working really hard and in poverty, you got to ask why. Well, one of the things we know is government. Government is almost always the cause of these things. And so what they really need is good government, not corrupt government. They also need, and this is especially true with these kinds of farmers, they need stable property laws. Apparently, in some of these countries where people grow coffee, you can't get ownership of the land. Or if you do get what you think is ownership of the land, it's iffy. And I mean, if you consider it for just a second, property ownership is really, I don't want to call it an imaginary thing, but it's really a thing of the mind, isn't it? So if you don't have it on paper, if you don't have laws that are governing that, it can be taken away pretty easily. And so that's part of what's going on in these countries. If you as a farmer can't trust that this is your property, why would you invest in it? Why would you do a good job with it? You wouldn't. You try to get in and out and not be too tied to it. What they really need too is free market price signals. They need to be able to feel the fact that there's an oversupply of coffee beans. And see, if the price is going down on coffee beans, and you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a business, if you see the price of coffee beans is decreasing, what's that going to make you want to do or not want to do?
avoid the market.
Yeah, you're going to want to avoid that. You're going to want to avoid that because that's not where you're going to make money. And then the fourth thing, and people don't like to hear this, but really what needs to happen is that those farmers need to be retrained. They need to have their stuff retooled for substitute markets. You can take the same land and the same equipment and do something else. Find something that there is a market for rather than go to the one. All right, well, let's try another one. Foreign aid. In the United States, we're a wealthy nation. We love to send foreign aid. We love to help other people out. In fact, our foreign aid started, I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but it's a history question. When did we really start giving foreign aid as a nation? Because it hasn't always been part of our history.
No.
It really started after World War I.
Yeah, it was some of that New Deals type stuff. And a little bit before that, actually.
Yeah, it was before the New Deal, and what we were trying to do is help Germany repay their war debt, since they got saddled with everything after World War I. But even then, the foreign aid wasn't coming through our government. It was coming from banks that agreed, and the government just kind of coordinated it. But it was really after World War II that we started sending aid. There was something called the Marshall Plan, where we helped European nations rebuild, not because we had this great love and compassion for them, but people in the government discovered that communism grew out of impoverished areas. And so what they wanted to do was get those people up and running so communism wouldn't take hold. Did the Marshall Plan and Marshall Aid help? Well, sort of.
Maybe.
Yeah, what they discovered in retrospect is the nations that received less Marshall Aid money recovered faster than those that received the most. How could that be?
Corrupt governments.
That's part of it, because the money has to go through. And actually a lot of that too was goods. It would be American companies that were sending goods, paid for by American tax dollars, but those would go to those countries. But it's always got
Disseminated and sold by corrupt governments.
it's always got to go through the hands of the government. And if you think about it too, when was the last time that foreign aid or welfare of any kind made somebody wealthy? Can you think of any example of that ever happening?
The receipt of foreign aid made them well.
Yeah. Historically, it has never happened. So, this is a good intention, but this one also has some hidden costs to it. And here are some of the hidden costs. The first one's not really a cost, it's just more something to know. typically foreign aid, if it's coming from the United States, it is enriching well-connected American companies. Because oftentimes what's happening, let me give you an example, the cotton industry. Farmers in this country are heavily subsidized by our government. And so often they grow too much. They grow way more than we need. And so what do you do with the excess cotton, for example? Well, you ship it overseas as foreign aid. And so that pretty much guarantees these farmers they don't have to be efficient. They can grow as much as they want. And they're always going to get a good price for it. And so it's benefiting those. And again, it benefits corrupt governments. The third one, there is no correlation between receiving aid and economic growth. It just doesn't work. And then here's the real cost to people who are on the ground where this stuff is coming in. Local businesses can't compete with free stuff. If we're giving them things and somebody's trying to start a business, how can you compete with free? I mean, doing my kettle corn vending stuff, I've gone to events where people in the next booth would be selling things for free, giving things away for free, or substantially lower than me. How much do you think people bought of what I was selling? Nobody, except a few insane people who don't care about their money. So yeah, it's really not helping to do this. Now let me push the pause button on this. I am not talking about disaster relief. Disaster relief is a different category. I think that's totally appropriate to send it in those cases. But as far as ongoing relief, it does not help those economies. It doesn't help the people in the long run. So what do they really need? Well, again, they need good government. That is a key. They need just and stable property laws. Okay, I'm the broken record. But here's what else they need. They really need some training in entrepreneurship. I have this great vision. I think we need to take the gospel all over the world. But what if we took the gospel and entrepreneur training? What if we took the gospel and a biblical worldview about economics as well? Why don't we do that? And I think that's what people really need. And then the last one is time to develop. We are one of the world's strongest economies currently. How long did it take us to get here?
Since the beginning.
Yeah, we started 1776 as a nation. Some people
We really started way before that.
Right. So if you want to look at
You have to look
colonization,
at-
we're in the
yeah.
1620, 1612, depending on where you pin it. Yeah, it took a long time for us to get here. So why do we imagine that us sending foreign aid is going to jumpstart these nations? It's not. Now, they don't have to remake the wheel, so to speak. They don't have to take as long as us, but it's going to take time to develop this. All right, so that's foreign aid. Let's look at another one. And the next one that we're going to talk about is...
Minimum wage has to be.
yeah, minimum wage, or some people, to make it more politically correct, will call it a living wage. A living wage. And so you've got the fight for 15 going on. The
15 for families.
What's
Not
that?
the 15 for families, not the families who are having to buy expensive McDonald's meals. It's still McDonald's food.
That's right.
It's
That's right.
expensive.
And I purposefully chose an image that's outside of McDonald's. So people with really good intentions, here's the thinking. Nobody, now don't comment on it when I ask this question. Can anybody sustain a family on minimum wage? Come on now. Is it really?
You said don't comment.
I said don't, well, I mean yes or no, but then don't give me any commentary. I should have said that.
Yes.
Can you?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it easy?
No.
Aren't you still at poverty level if you're on minimum wage?
Yes.
Yeah, you are. You are. Now you can get by on it, but you know you're still not going to have a great life in this country having all the stuff with minimum wage. And so the idea here is that to be fair, we need to bump up minimum wage to $15 because if we can get it to $15, then those families won't be so desperate. What?
I said, what's gonna happen if you do? All it's gonna do is take that differentiation between here and here and move it to here and here.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's even worse than that. Here's a
Now
good
these poor
question.
families can't take their kids to McDonald's.
Yeah, that's right, because it's going to be too expensive.
Yeah.
here's another way to think about this. And anybody who you find supporting upping minimum wage, ask them this: well, why stop at 15? Why don't we go to 50? Why don't we go to $100 an hour? I mean, why not?
Rampant inflation.
Not only that, what else is going to happen?
It's gonna drive businesses out of business.
That's right. If McDonald's has to pay, let's go 25. If they've got to pay their employees $25 an hour, or even 15, are they going to be able to hire as many people as they could before?
Only if they can keep their volume up, and they won't be able to with the increased prices.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now,
Because a lot of people are on salary.
yeah.
And when these people, when these people who are on, $25 an hour, they'll be able to maybe afford McDonald's. But now you've got people who are on salary who have gotten on salary because they worked so hard to get there and can't keep up.
Yeah, yeah.
And those businesses who pay salary have to go out of business.
Right, right. And this is what I tell my students will happen too, and I know they don't believe me. But imagine going through McDonald's and you pull up to the drive-thru and somebody comes on the speaker and it's somebody in India. Would that in your wildest imagination ever happen?
Mm-mm.
It would. Right now the technology is available that it would actually be cheaper to outsource somebody in India. If this thing goes to 15, you watch and see. People will be replaced with kiosks. You might have a few employees.
They're already doing that we went to a McDonald's and there was nobody at the counter. I went up to the counter and the woman walked from behind the counter and pulled me over to a machine. And it took me a whole lot longer, and I just finally said, forget it. And I walked up to the counter. I said, I'm going to tell you what I want, and you can take my order. She said, you didn't try that? I said, I'm about to leave. And she goes, okay, I'll take your order. But they would rather you go to the kiosk than
Yes.
talk to a real person, even though there's nobody at the counter.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen. People will be replaced with technology. I mean, once the price of technology is less than the price of people, there's no question
There's
about
no
what's gonna
incentive to
happen.
keep the people working.
That's right. So here is the hidden cost behind all this. And the first two are really the moral implications of it that frankly I don't think we even consider. Whenever you institute a minimum wage, it takes away the voluntary relationship between employer and employee. And it replaces it with coercion. It replaces it with a government gun telling an employer, you must pay this. Well, what if the person doesn't bring that kind of economic value? You must pay this. And so it messes up this whole kind of relationship. Here's the big one though, the second one, is that it raises unemployment. This is what we know happens. Basic economics, supply and demand, lead to that conclusion. We see it statistically as well. That where you have a higher minimum wage, the more it goes up, the higher the unemployment rate. And there's a reason for that, which is the last bullet. What it does is raise the barrier for the people at the bottom. If you think about economic success as a ladder, when you raise minimum wage, you make that rung a lot higher. And so you want to give people the opportunity to step up on it, but if it's too high, they're not going to be able to step up on it. I trace everything back to my students. Being in a private Christian school, I tell them, you automatically in the workforce have a great advantage over most people your age. You have a good work ethic, you look people in the eye, you know how to shake a hand, you know how to say hello, you know how to present yourself, you know how to come clean and with your hair fixed. A lot of people don't have those values. How are they going to get a job at $15 an hour when they can't even look people in the eye, when they can't even run a cash register? They're not going to be able to do it. And think about handicapped folks. If you've got a handicap, how are you ever going to be able to get a job if the rung is so high that you can never step up onto it? And so really this ends up hurting the people who are the most vulnerable as you raise minimum wage. So it's a good, it's a good intention, but it has a really bad consequence. So what do they really need? They need a low first rung on the economic ladder. My opinion is we need to completely get rid of minimum wage. And a question I want to ask anybody who's wanting to fight for 15, why are you staying in a job that pays minimum wage? Which is my second one. Don't you have more ambition than to work in the same position at McDonald's? You ought to have a little bit more ambition. And we also need politicians who understand economics. They don't, or they're intentionally not telling the truth about it. All right, let's look at the last one. Look at that poor woman. That poor, sad woman. What's this picture from?
It's from the Depression of the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, that's right. And so, you know, that Great Depression, which was hard times economically, and this poor woman looking pensively, what is she going to do? What is she going to do? This picture, by the way, was a setup. It was contrived, but you know, she still had some hard times. So with this one, I want to talk about various forms of welfare. Whether it is WIC, women, infants, and children, whether it is what we call food stamps, which now is called an EBT card, or anybody getting any kind of government assistance. It's a good intention, but there is a negative behind it. Now, probably you've already got some gripes about it. What do you know is a problem with welfare of any form? What are some of the negative incentives that
A lot
come
of
with
it's
it?
unchecked.
What's that?
A lot of it's unchecked.
Why does that matter?
Well, because, I mean, you have people who are able to afford, I mean, a lot of these foods that they're not even gonna eat. The food's gonna be spoiled, you know, people are not gonna eat it. Sometimes people can take it, sell it off, and use it for other things. It's just unchecked money.
Okay, yeah, and retailers also know how to play with this system and actually make money off of it. So that's a problem. What else? What have been the results in this country since we entered into this welfare state?
Disincentivizes those.
yeah.
There's no incentive to move upward. There's no incentive to work.
Yeah, why not?
If you get
Why
paid,
work
they'll
for something when you get it for free?
Yeah, there's an old saying, what gets rewarded gets repeated. And this is a reward. If you're getting a check every month or whatever may be the case, that's like a reward. And what gets punished, people stop that behavior. And so, yeah, what else? You know, we've really with the Great Depression is when our whole welfare thing started. But then it really kicked into gear with Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society and his war on poverty. What was happening up to Lyndon Johnson is that poverty rates were declining. And then once he started the war on poverty, they kind of leveled off. I mean, it's cyclical, but it stays about the same. So we were moving in a good direction. And we've spent, I don't know, how many trillions of dollars in this war on poverty. And yet the poverty rate continues to remain the same. It's like it's a leaky bucket that we can never fill up. Well, here are some of the hidden costs to various forms of welfare. First, there's a lot of waste and inefficiency. A lot of it. Because if it's going through the federal government and then being distributed on down, of course it's not being handled very well. If it's not your money, you're not going to be efficient with it. A lot of it's wasted. More power for government, which I'm opposed to. Less available income because it's coming from somewhere, either from you being taxed or they're creating the money out of thin air through the Federal Reserve, which we'll talk about in one of the sessions, which is undermining the value of your money every single day, which gives you less purchasing power. It's causing inflation. And now, I don't understand exactly how this works, but according to economists, the people who get the government checks, if they immediately spend those, their money is actually worth more than yours. Because there's greater value with what they spend immediately than you waiting a little bit longer. I don't totally get that, but that's what they say. It creates cycles of dependency, people who are locked into this. I mean, think about a child who's born into a family where that's all they've ever known, is the welfare check is what sustains them. They'll see it as an entitlement, and they'll see it as the way things are. It's definitely causing family breakdown. Think about it.
They give more to families that are not, to families where parents are not married.
Yeah, how if you're a single mom, how can you get more money from the government?
Have more kids, don't get married.
Yeah, have more kids and with a different father.
Mm-hmm.
The greater the number of different fathers, the more the payment. So I've heard. And so you look at that kind of horrible incentive. And so you've got family. Did you realize that there are segments of our country where you have something like a 75% illegitimacy rate? That means there's no father in the home. Why? Because welfare effectively replaces the father, and it takes away responsibility from the men. And why wouldn't they do this? And where you see family breakdown, you will see high levels of government entitlement spending, high levels. And then you would think they would be the happiest people on earth, wouldn't you? Because they're getting free money, but they're not, are they? Instead, what you see is anger. I mean, where do riots happen? Where do people feel hopeless? In fact, where do you find the most advertisements for the lottery? It's in poor places, where they'll have billboards that say, this is your ticket out, a lottery ticket on the billboard. And so this does not help. In fact, it goes exactly the opposite way. So what do they really need? If we're going to do charity, it needs to have these characteristics. And in a further session, we'll get a little bit more into this. I'm just going to hit these highlights right now. They really need, if a person needs help, it really should not be from Mordor on the Potomac, so many miles away. It really needs to come from a local level. And I don't even mean state. I don't even mean from Raleigh. I mean immediately local. That seems to be the best place for this. And it should be short term, because the minute you make it long term, people get locked into that. We also definitely need a new worldview in a different value system. It frightens me that there are so many Bernie Sanders supporters today among the young. That tells me they have a worldview of entitlement. Unfortunately, they don't vote much. So we might be okay if he's the nominee. But really, a biblical worldview is what we need here. Biblical worldview emphasizes the value of hard work and getting a return on your work. And then training and encouragement to be productive. Again, I think this would be good mission stuff. This would be good evangelism, to go into areas and help people see, here's the biblical ideal of money and of being productive. I mean, you can't get past the letters of Paul. And Paul saying, you need to produce something so you can help other people out at the very least. Carry your own weight. So this is what's really needed. And this is a big deal, because we need a sea change of values in this country. And we're headed in totally the wrong direction as our political establishment bears out. And I'm going to stop with this one. This guy is a Christian philosopher. His name was Etienne Gilson. Quite honestly, I had never heard of him until I read Money, Greed, and God. But I like this quote. Piety is no substitute for technique. Your piety is your religious feeling, your fervor for your faith. Sorry, I didn't mean to alliterate that. But sometimes we want to do good things, but we don't think about the consequences of it. For example, you drive up to the intersection. Here's the person holding the sign. Your bowels of compassion tell you, okay, I've got a $20 bill. I should give that. But should you? I don't want you to answer me. Ask yourself, is this piety but not good technique? Okay, there are the two books that I recommend if you want to know economics. Economics in one lesson, if you just read about 50 pages, you've got it. You don't need to read the rest of it. So next week what we're going to talk about is this subject, why the poor don't get poorer as the rich get richer. I know some people would call it income inequality. Total myth. Total myth.